Hello and welcome to the Design Summit. I want to start the whole hour here with one image that I shot in New York during NIB and which won the first prize at the Nemetschek Photo Gallery this year in 2021. And I start with this image because for me it is a good reminder that whenever we have something very beautiful in front of our lens, it often carries the major load to get something beautiful out of it. Our responsibility when we shoot images or when we create visualization is, of course, to give the whole thing all the attention that we can provide and to influence the communication that will happen with our work. And that puts a huge responsibility on our shoulders. And of course, we need to be artists, engineers, and technicians, and maybe something more. And all of these parts that finally play into the game, as much as 1 hour can hold it, I try to put into this 1 hour here. And I hope you enjoy the ride. There is maybe something that you know already, and you will say, I know that, and it's get boring. And there might be someone else who is very interested in it. So bear with me, there is certainly a huge mix, and I hope I can provide something new to you, so the whole hour is worth your time. Thank you for being here. Let's get started. But first, let me start with a short little story about Nemetschek and what I have done. It started in the early 90s where we had in our office Allplan, and so I had to learn a little bit the Allplan and had some training at Nemetschek in Berlin. I bought also Archicad, and of course I did a lot of damage with it. You can see those buildings in Berlin. As a lead designer I had a lot of freedom, to be honest. And the story goes a little bit further, and today we talk about Vectorworks. And when I look at the feature set of Vectorworks, then I can say it looks like the first 2 decades of my life, pretty much. Light show, stage design, architecture, and engineering. All of that in one package. This is wonderful. Today I'm more focused on Cinema 4D and motion graphics, visual effects, and cinema. And to get the story started, I want to go here into some of the previews that I have created. And I use here most of the time a polished concrete because that gives mostly the idea how light works on a surface. And it is maybe a little bit shy in terms of details and whatnot, but it's the best way to see what we are doing. Later on, we will see how much mood we can create. And speaking of mood, the main idea here is, of course, to look into materials, to look into light and into cameras. And I will go, of course, into Cinema 4D to show you what is really under the hood with Redshift 3D, so you understand more what is offered in Vectorworks, and you can maybe adjust some values more with confidence. And I give you also a little tour into Cinema 4D. And again, I say, let's get started. Sorry for a long introduction. The wonderful world of materials, and I will not even pretend here to cover everything that we can do inside of Vectorworks or Cinema 4D or Redshift. This is an endless theme, and I'm very happy that it is, because otherwise we would have already reached everything here and we couldn't invent something new. And invent something new is certainly the base of Vectorworks or Cinema 4D, and especially one of the key features that we have with Redshift 3D. I want to show you here some materials. I have pre-rendered them. Based on that, I want to write a book, or I'm in the process of it. And these materials communicate with pretty much everyone who has seen those materials. These materials are typically connected with a certain set of memories, moods, and so on. So when we use materials in our buildings, in our set design, wherever, we also address something that is already stored in our audience, so we can access information in the fastest way. To make good use of it, we want to create, of course, materials in the best way. And this means we need the best tools and the most access to pretty much everything. In Vectorworks, we can use the standard interface that we know already from the realistics materials. There we have typically 4 different quality levels, and the huge mix out of all these qualities gives then something very unique, especially when we use textures, and maybe we go then later to Cinema 4D, and there we have the option to go with Redshift 3D node system to work. And the node system scares normally people, and I understand that, but bear with me. The idea of a node system is to take every step apart into tiny little handleable units. And each unit has a very specific duty, which is normally not very hard to understand. And then we combine them to something unique, to something maybe new. And you can express your ideas in the best way. And you get maybe a style in your work that is also absolutely unique. There, I said it again. And I want to close here with, of course, this little marble here. And I hope you got already an idea what we can do with Redshift's renderer. And I want to hop now to the next theme. So finally we come to Vectorworks, and I have seen in some forums that people say, hey, Redshift is not the fastest, it's slower than the realistic renderer. And comparison are always a little bit difficult. Is the purpose for Redshift really a simple model that you can set up like I do here? And I can prove the point, yes, Redshift is here slower, because it evaluates pretty much every single pixel. And to my knowledge, the realistic renderer has some shortcuts in it. It's pretty much the physical render in Cinema 4D, and you can see normally how it works. So I have done these tests, and as you have seen maybe on a little time, Redshift is slower, but I would say the fast version of Redshift is equal in quality than the final version of the realistic renderer. And I've seen tests where people compare these two. So make your own test, make your own ideas about it, and if you have an option to render a large project, maybe with depth of field in it, and maybe motion blur when you have a camera animation and so on, then you might see that Redshift gets really fast compared to other options. With a little bit more complex setup, and certainly not as complex as your standard architectural models, I wanted to take a look what is finally the difference between the realistic final and the Redshift fast version. I have built this little model here based on the ideas what I want to demo here today, and what I want to explain, of course, along the way with all of these options here. So I render this in realistic exterior final, and you can see the quality is not bad. But what I want to see is also what is going on when we use Redshift 3D exterior fast. And it's a little bit brighter, so the light bounces maybe a little bit more around also, but this is an adjustment, this is not critical. So let's have a look to the interfaces where we can set up the qualities for the different render engines. And to create a new render work style, we can go here through the tabs and we can compare them, of course. On the left side we have the realistic, on the right side we have now the Redshift. So inside of the options we have less options, but that's enough. And again, the optics options are the one, and large projects that are the key here for using Redshift by Maxon. The bounces are relatively the same. We had a little bit more in the fast version. The environment lighting, ambient lighting, and ambient occlusion is, I think, nothing new to anyone who has rendered before. And here, please keep these 4 levels in mind. I will show you that later in another interface. And lighting, of course, indirect lighting, 1, 4, and 16 bounces. And here we have a long list of HDR as before, same methods, so nothing new, you don't have to learn too much. And here we can set up a camera, and I want to show you that with the blur, and I set everything to a complete mess. So let's go here to the render settings, and first of all I want to show you what I have done. I switched denoising off because that's super slow on my computer here, and I didn't saw really a reason to use it here for this test. So this would be a little bit blurry. Let's do more damage here to the picture with more blur. And that has to do, of course, that I set the depth of field closer to the camera, so the background is now completely in blur, and the object becomes so the background here. That's certainly not how it should be, but what I want to demonstrate here is how fast this huge blur gives you a feedback here. And that means in the moment you can see already what happens. In 1 or 2 seconds you can adjust the values instead of waiting an hour. And this is what I really enjoy, setting up these values here, because after 2 seconds you already know that's not working, or maybe that's exactly what I had in mind. And so let's hop over to a different view here. And I have an imported object here, that head. And for my art gallery here, I have the feeling that there's a bounding box around this head, and this is the measurement that I get. So I use the tape measurement to get really the distance between camera, and look at here. That looks already very promising. I have the foreground relatively sharp and the background nicely blurry, so I can guide my audience in the way I want to have it. And after all of that, we are now ready to export to Cinema 4D. With Send to Cinema 3D only, we can say exactly what we want to see in Cinema 4D, and we get all the parts that we have decided to see. Of course, the lights are not in Redshift quality, so we can select them all or one by one and convert them with this little button here. Don't worry, we go through that one more time because that's an important step, and sometimes things come differently to Cinema 4D, and I want to cover both cases, of course. Here we can see some artifacts on our imported objects, and I want to show you how we fix them. These black dots here, they are not really healthy for our further work. So this is mostly the normal tag that caused this trouble here. And then we have another thing here, and that's the font tag. We have to change the smoothing angle, and then we get exactly this. So we have now here a blue lilac surface that's also not healthy. We have to change the normals. We have to do that for the other head as well. Go here to mesh, to normals, and it's fixed already. Very simple to do, and the normal tag, of course, goes away. We don't need this anymore. As I promised, we do this whole game again, and this time I have some other settings. I have all these cameras here that I want to export, and then we go again to Send to Cinema 3D only, and in a fresh new scene I get here, because I've restarted the computer, I have to choose Cinema 4D first. Then I say Cinema 4D, I say open, and we get all the options here again. I sort this by texture because that's easier for me in visualization. That's maybe not the case when you want to work as an architect in Vectorworks, but for visualization that's the best way from my point of view. Choose whatever makes you happy, of course. Okay, so I change here quickly to the final result, so I get some other settings here. And then I go again to Send to Cinema 4D, same settings, and finally I made up my mind and send it over. So I can explore here the settings again. What do I get from my export? And to do so, I untwirl here this little plus sign, so I get all these options. The lights are again in native Cinema 4D format. I have to convert them if I want to work with Redshift, and I press here again the button. It's a one-click thingy only. And then I see here the cameras have already the Redshift tag, and here I can open the materials. And all these materials are native Cinema 4D materials. So I show you that shortly, what we normally get, and this is working with Redshift, but it's not optimized, of course. So all these channels here, whatever we have inside, to a certain degree, there are some exceptions, will be easily convertible with this tool here. Tool and convert and replace all materials. I'm brave enough to replace them. I don't want to have my backup. And so I get now here pretty much the same. So what happens here? When I double click, I can see I can open the node editor, or I can have here an interface where I have some parameters and I can choose which one I like most. At the moment, I have here a very simple setup, a texture that goes into the material and then to the output. So when I go now and want to say, hey, that's concrete, that shouldn't be that glossy, then I can go inside of my node, go to materials, and from there I can just say the weight of the reflection should be very limited. Just a little bit. There's always something that is sparkling in concrete, of course, some stones also look up. And so I think to have it totally on 0 would be not wise. Even concrete is often very dull. Okay, the class by itself is a standard reflection shader. There is also an option to set up thin film reflection inside of the materials. And that helps to reduce render times, because most of the time we have to deal with pane glass. And that doesn't need to be refracted. That's a waste of render time, of course. And then we can go here to the render settings. And as I said before, we have 4 different qualities in the basic setup. Sounds familiar? Exactly. It's similar, very similar, just so you have a nice and easy life to set up what you want. The samples inside of this is a little bit more complicated, and the more you know about it, the faster your renders will be, because you can optimize the scene. But that's a long story. I don't want to talk too much about it in this hour, but I want to show you where all these options are sitting. And you can see here already we have way more options inside of Cinema 4D with Redshift 3D than the interface in Vectorworks can show you. Okay. Here I set up a light channel, and I do this here to create an AOV, which is an arbitrary output variable. And I will go later into the game with that, and I will show you a nice little trick to save some time. Okay, then we have here different bit depths and different image formats as well as movie formats. And we have also here a multipass, which I will show you later as well. So the output gives me the option to set the absolute resolution, the frame rates, and the DPI if you want, because I see many people think in DPI when they render. Here we think normally just in pixels, and that's the whole world for us normally. But we have an option here in the interface. So one more thing in Vectorworks. Classes are a very big theme in Vectorworks for organizational purposes, and they arrive in Cinema 4D in layers. And the layers are here all white, so I give them some colors so you can see what really happens. When they're all white, they make no sense in the object manager, which is the part above this area here. And just give me a sec to find here the most horrible colors. And then we can go already and have a look to all these objects that have arrived here. And so we go here to View and to Unfold All. And then you can see here the little color chips on the right or nearly in the middle, and that gives you already an idea where you are and where your objects are. I hope this helps you in a huge way. To have here the solo button might help as well. And of course, when you like, you can switch them all on or off. When they're all on, then they are useless from my point of view, but just to show this. Light has a huge space in my life, and this fascinates me in a really tremendous way. I can't overstate it enough. When I was 13, I started making light show for bands and for stage design, for theater groups and so on. Later architecture and filmmaking, photography, 3D, all of that needs light and a good understanding of it. So what I want to do here today is to summarize a few decades of experience just with 4 little qualities. And I think I've learned from the best, so I will share this knowledge here. Size and direction would be 1. Size and distance is where we start here. And the larger the light source is and the closer it is, the more soft the appearance of our objects will be. So I have used here this object based on that I want to have something scattered, something hard, and something soft. So I scattered that head here in a sculpture. And this light works nicely. When I move this light source now into the distance, even when the same size is given, it is relatively small. So the further away it is, the harder it gets, because it becomes smaller. And of course it becomes also a little bit more dull. We need to crank it up, but that's not a problem in 3D, of course. So what we get here are already some harsh shadows in the eyes. When we take now this light source and make it very small in the large distance, this is also relatively speaking not a big difference. But when we put it now very in short distance to it, then we see all of a sudden it's very harsh. Here in comparison, the three main states where we have harsh or totally blown out or very soft. This is not all. The direction of the light is also one of the parameters that we have, and I want to explore this with you. So for that, I go back to my scene, and here I move now the light a little bit around, so you can see what happens to the face and the little fragments that are scattered around. You can see that it modulates, it sculpts pretty much the face, and the expression is each time a little bit different. So it's an exploration that I can only encourage you to do, and with the pretty much fast feedback that we get from Redshift 3D, this exploration is done in no time. Think about to do that on a real set. It would take days perhaps to get all these large light sources moved around and have it all handy all the time. In Cinema 4D, we have a studio in a pocket, as I call it, since 2 decades, and we can learn cinematography and light and all of that pretty much on a small laptop, even if we like to. And the exploration is really worth the admission, so to say. And I will, of course, compare all these findings that I have here with my tiny little exploration with you in a second. And again, I changed the light source size and the direction, and of course spread means how far it spreads out, or if it is more a parallel spot, it has also to do with it. So we have direction, we have distance, we have size, we had intensity, and I would call normally color as well as one of the influences, but that's debatable. There's always color involved. There's no real white. It's always either yellow or blue or whatever. Our eyes adapt so easily that we sometimes think white is the only color for light. No, I'm kidding, but you get the idea. We have these few things and we can really do a lot of stuff with it. Here is the comparison between all of these movements with pretty much the same area light source. And you can see the appearance of the face and the little fractures or chunks are pretty much very different. So huge advantage when we move light, when we put it in distance, or when we increase the size or decrease the size, intensity, and the color. Color I have left out. I think that's self-explanatory. I will put some basic tips here from time to time into our hour, and one is how to handle a light source. So you can pick them up here, a spotlight for example, and when it's selected and when you are in move mode and object mode, then you can move this thing here around in the scene. But there's another little trick, and I want to show that. The light has to be selected, and then you go to cameras, to use cameras, and select object as camera. Then you look through the light source by itself. That's pretty nice. So you see already what you're doing and where the light source is. And when you press the Option key or Alt key down, you can even rotate this around with the mouse, just like this. Very intuitive. Maybe you give it a try and you set up your light in the way you want. Very simple, very easy. So you can go back to the default camera and set up maybe a new camera. Click here to activate the camera, and then you can move the camera in a similar way around, and you are already way more in control about the scene than before, just 1 minute later. This might be a longer take now, and I hope you have the patience to follow me here along, because we talk about mood and light and samples and volumetric light and all of that in one package here. So typically we search with the camera what we can do. And when we have found a place where we want to stay for a while, maybe we change our mind, then we change the lights again, and all of that is each time a new compositing in terms of illumination and camera position and whatever you want to express. So to explore this a little bit more, I go here to Objects and use the Redshift environment to introduce you to the Volumetric Light. And the environment object is needed to get this effect here, not the white one. I took it just down with the volume slider, and the dome is pretty much illuminating everything, so you get everything white when it's to 1.0. And the volume slider in details is exactly the one that is responsible for all the volumetric light in conjunction with the Redshift environment. And typically the exploration of a scene is back and forth, light sources, light colors, change this and then see, oh, it's maybe too bright here, too small, to whatever. And we might go also a little bit over the top when we want to have some effects in it, like putting a light in that skull here or in that head and get really light rays out of it. So with the volume slider here again, you can fine-tune this, and it will lead us after a while also to explore how to get rid of all the noise that we have in the scene, even after we let it render and sit here for a while. And when the noise is not going away, even after many iterations, then we have to explore what samples are. And that's normally the theme where most people say, okay, that's too complicated, I don't want to talk about it. But we talk about it because I want to help you to feel very easy with it and to see what's going on. But first of all, I go here a little bit more into the scene, play around, so you see how a normal standard setup would work. It's back and forth, and we change things again and again. And so I go here with that light. I'm fine with that maybe. Then I switch it off and on again. And you get the idea. It's really very fast to see what happens, to get an idea, to get a taste for it. And after a while, you think, okay, I'm done here. That's pretty much where I want to be. And let it sit, it renders progressively, or you switch it even to the final render and you hope that you get something that is pleasing your eye. But surprisingly, there's maybe sometimes some noise in it. And that noise has a reason. Typically, in a scene with Redshift 3D, the render settings have a parameter to put some samples from the camera into the scene to explore the scene. That's pixel based. That's why when we started this hour, we saw that a small scene with low elements in it is very fast with other renderers, and since we go pixel by pixel with Redshift, it might be a little bit slower when we talk about easy or small objects. The more we go into volumetric light, for example, and all these things, and depths of field, the more this is an advantage, because we were already on pixel based, but we need maybe more samples, like I adjust them here now. So the threshold gives maybe pretty much an error value. Every time the pixel comparison to the neighbors have an error or a distance to each other, it says, okay, we need maybe to sample a little bit more, or a little bit more, and then we finally get to the maximum value when this threshold was never reached, or it stops before. Then we need some samples that go into the scene, and that means from the light source, for example. The light source gives information into the scene, and the more precisely it can do it, the more information is already inside of the scene, and the camera, based on the render settings, can take advantage of these sources, of these information. And that's pretty much the whole magic in it. It's a balance act. If you have nearly no information from the light source, then the camera needs to work very hard and maybe never reaches anything usable. If the light source is very high in samples, but the camera is very low, it might never get anything usable. So typically the camera has a certain amount, but the whole scene will provide more samples at all. So let's render this here again. We get more and more samples in the scene with each iteration, and I will compare all of these iterations on the end of this segment so you can see how we improve things. So I go again here into details, and I increase the volume samples here because we have a problem with the volume and not with something else here really. Everything is a little bit noisy, but for now we take care of the volume. So we let this sit here again, cook again, render again, and it's already a little bit finer. We are getting there. We don't want to oversample it because that takes render time, and we want to have an optimized scene where the quality is paid not with too much render time. And so we do it again. We double here, and it's a good idea to always double from 4 to 8 to 16 to 32 to 64, 128, 256, and so on. Never values between. That wouldn't work because it needs always a multiplication of what you had already in the render settings. So last try, and we see we have success. When you take a look, it's pretty clean already where the blue light comes out of the head. And that gives me now the chance to compare all of these three things. And we will see from the left to the right, we have an increased quality based on our increased settings of the samples. I think that was not really difficult. And in the moment you do this a few times, you know it's motion blur, it's volume, it's this or that, where to increase the samples. As promised, I want to show you, of course, how we can set up a volumetric spotlight, and the spotlight could be a point light or whatever, but here with a spotlight we have maybe the best chances to get something decent. And you can see the different rings for the inner and outer where it fades a little bit to the outside. It's all visually very nicely created. And when we have this light source here, we go to the render view because we want to see it from the start. What we're getting here, no volume light at the moment. So we have to go here to Objects and Redshift Environment, and bang, there it is. And you can see already there's a little bit of these rays in the shadow area. And it works with color, of course. Based on intensity, it is nearly white and it gets darker or more saturated. And you can see here again, the volume is really the key slider for all of that. Very simple to set up. And I have here the cone angle, the fall-off angle, and the fall-off curve is, of course, between these two circles. How fast it falls off. Very easy. Okay. Cameras are really a big part of my life as well, and I love to work with them virtually or practically in any way for film or for stills. And that leads me always to explore both options here with Cinema 4D or in practical. We have also a lot of cameras inside of Vectorworks, and I have set them up here with naming 1.1 to 1.2 so you can see what I have here in Cinema 4D. It's pretty much the same setup. You will find them just by exporting them to Cinema 4D. What I want to do here, I have 5 cameras that I want to combine into an animation, and for that I have to go to Create, to Camera, and then I choose here Camera Morph, and you can see the line directly connects them. This is based on the sequence we have inside of that tag or plugin, and I want to give this camera a good color here while the tag is active, and then I can see already when I move it which camera it is. And the blend slider is now pretty much my animation master tool here, and this is pretty much all. I can switch it on and then I get already in preview inside of the render preview. And finally I want, of course, to animate all of that, and for that I go to the time slider here to 0. Then I click here on this little square. I can blend this later. I will explain what that means in a second, but for now I want to show how easy it is. Just move the tilt slider to the end, and then the blend slider to the end. Of course, anything between is possible. Click again, and my animation is already done. And it interpolates, as you can see on the green camera, among all of these camera settings. And this is in the Morph Tracks. When you click there in that tab, you will find all the options to filter or not what you need. Okay, when I move this here slowly, I can go also to certain areas, and when I have a lot of movement between only a few frames, the camera will move faster. And I can change this, of course, in any way. When I move this little keyframe here, then I have more frames between with the same amount of distance, and the camera will move slower. So this would be maybe the first part that you want to check when you want to make changes. And we have, of course, more. When we go here to the filter tab, then we can see how many of these qualities of each camera is inherited to the main camera, to the Morph camera. And of course, we have to check for a moment the different interpolations among all of these cameras, linear, soft, and soft 2, based on the movement that you want to have. Sometimes one or the other is maybe better. And of course, we can go to each individual camera and change the position, the rotation, and so on, and also all these parameters that the camera has, which leads finally to a different camera path. So there's always change possible, but keep in mind when you want to change something, maybe the curve here, the blend curve, is a good idea. So when we move this in one or the other corner, then the start or the end is faster, and of course with that something gets slower. The whole duration is of course always the same. With the animation in place, we want to change maybe the illumination, and for that we can go to the asset browser, and based on our exploration with the animation path, we have gotten maybe some ideas what we want to have. So we have here materials or textures. When we have a sphere-like appearance, then we have a material. When it's a square, normally it's a texture. So how do we get the texture out of that material so we can use it in the Redshift dome light? That's pretty simple. I have to close this here. And when I go to the dome light, I can have here all my parameters. And I want to drive them, of course, with an HDR. This is here in the backplate when I want to see it, or in the environment when I want to use it for lighting. So I go here to this material, I open it, and inside the luminance we will find here this little path. When I click on it, I can copy it, and after I have copied it, I go back to my RS dome and just paste it in. Command or Control V, and that's all we have to do. And all of a sudden we have now here a spherical map in it, because these HDRs inside of the asset browsers are equirectangulars, so they are perfect for a spherical projection. I can change here, of course, some of these parameters, but I don't want to do that at the moment. What we need to do is maybe first to explore the whole thing, how it looks like, and with the fast feedback that we get from Redshift, we can do so very quickly, very easily. Okay, and with that all in place, we get already a nice idea where we are. Maybe we have overexposed it here, for example, a little bit. And so we dial it down, maybe not too much, because we want to explore it a little bit more. So when we go to the coordinates, we can rotate the whole dome. That means we rotate the whole HDR or the whole world in practical terms around the object, and the light will change dramatically. And with that new light, we have, of course, to explore the whole thing, our animation path, if we want to have it now in this way with this light. And it is, as I said before, always a balance act. And the beauty here with fast feedback, how the light really works on the image, even if we get here something noisy as a preview, is of course very nice. And when we want to change maybe now our whole direction, that we place the camera on the back side here, then we can do so. And it is always a back and forth. Maybe we had that before and the light was not nice, then we change the light, then the camera is better maybe from the other side, and so on. You get the idea. It's always a question of reacting to what you see and get the best out of it. After all, we want to communicate to our clients. we do not in the business just to satisfy our needs. And with that, we go already to the next theme. With Redshift now in the mix, we have also the option to create maybe an effect that is otherwise a lot of work in terms of modeling. And we want to catch, of course, these little edge lights, these specular highlights on our elements. And for that, we have to integrate here only the RS round corner. And I will show you that in a comparison, but you can see here already there's a little bit more light on that edge, and that makes all the difference. So just put it into the bump input and you will see it's here magnified, so it's a little bit rough, but here you can see the effect, what it does. It calculates where is the corner, and that's it. Here in comparison, and I hope the gray bar gives exactly an idea where we are at the moment. But you can see in the top area we have that a little bit more soft edge, and in the lower part the harder one. So the next part is here based on something that goes out of Cinema 4D on the end into Photoshop, and what I want to do here is kind of an interactive lighting experience. The truth is I have to set up some lights here, and I don't do this here for the purpose of the demo in a way that I would say that's aesthetically pleasing or whatever. The idea here is more to create light sources that are very different each time, so you can see what I'm doing here. With a normal light setup, that would be maybe much more delicate in terms of lighting values that you can adjust. But so let's follow me here, please, for a moment, and I will set up maybe 2 more light sources, always with the selected object as camera in mind, so we know where we are pointing our light source. It's an area light. It can be done with any light source that you have in a scene. So here I use a very large one, and just to get some diffuse light in it, very soft, and as you have seen it before. So with all of that nearly in place, maybe 1 more light, and then I hope we can check already what we get. I have set up here the camera for the wrong image. That happens. It's easily fixable normally, but for now I want to go here just with my false light source and move it around, get another light impression different from all the other ones, as I said before. And when I have done all of that, I need to specify, of course, exactly each light source, so we can create different channels for these when we render them out. So I think I finish up here with this one. It's maybe not perfect, but that's not the point here, as I said before. Okay, 1 more and I think I'm done here. Let's hop over to the light sources, and the first one, I go here to the add, and I do this here to create an AOV, which is an arbitrary output variable, and I give this here a very specific name because I've done it before, and when we would take the same name, then maybe more lights would go into one of these groups. Here in the render settings, I can set up the diffuse lighting as I've done it before. I have to uncheck all the ones that I've used before. And with all of that in place, I can go here already into the rendering, just 1 frame. Everything is fine. Render it out. I have accelerated here the process, so you don't have to wait a few minutes. And then I go already to Photoshop, and I have my Sketch and Toon channels here. I don't want to have them. So first of all, get clear what each channel does. That's normally a little bit sorting and checking and playing with it. So you know already where each channel is, because these little previews here don't give so much away, but they indicate what you're doing. I use normally the fill for that, because when I adjust each of these layers here now, with the fill only, then I can select maybe a group or all of them and change the opacity. A good idea is maybe to have a black background, so we can limit every layer and we do not end up with something that is transparent in the scene. So you can see here already I fine-tune things that normally would require a rendering. In that quality, it would take each time a few minutes, and that's maybe not very intuitive. So to branch out with the final rendering for each light source and set it up in Photoshop is maybe a good idea when you are tight in time, and maybe even when your client sits side by side you and you want to give them exactly what he likes to have. Okay, I think the concept is clear, and you can render out new light sources, add them, delete something, or just even create a mask so you have only influence from a certain part. Before I go and summarize everything, I want to share one more tip with you, or maybe two. And one is based on the idea of digital elevation modeling, and I have seen this question more than often, and so I want to answer this here because it is very, very nicely integrated here. What we need to do this is just a material from Redshift, and I go here to my Finder, and then I can pull in the digital elevation map, which is a gray map here. And I have to find a displacement node and then pipe this into this node. That's a very difficult pass here. And so into the displacement, and that's pretty much all there is to it. More I don't have to do with the material. So the nodes are flowing information from A to B to C, and that's all we need to do. With that done, and I put the reflection a little bit down because the landscape isn't so shiny normally, I go and take here in Redshift an object tag. Inside I go to geometry, override and tessellation and displacement. So I get the needed polygon amount inside of our rendering, and each and everything will be then reflected inside of the displaced map. And you will see when we render it what happens here. From that flat little plane we get all of a sudden Colorado. A little bit flat here at the moment. I think it's a little bit more elevated. So we go to the tag and we increase the maximum displacement. That's the space where it lives in, and then we can say how high we want to have it. That's maybe a little bit over the top, and so you can see how easily we get out of a tiny little plane a whole landscape with all the details inside. And I think that's worth the few seconds that I have used here. With this, I want to summarize now finally what we have done. We came from Vectorworks and we explored the interface there, which is streamlined to your work process as you are used to it. And of course, I wanted to go to Cinema 4D. Based on that, we can see pretty much what is under the hood with Redshift, and you can understand what you have in Vectorworks in a better way. What we also need to do is, of course, to see the qualities that we can create with all the light, material, and camera settings, as this triangle of these three things are super important for the communication that we have with our clients or with the world when we want to talk about things that are not in existence because we just plan them, we just visualize them. And with that, we have to adapt from the analog time to the digital time and see where we can get the best out of both worlds, perhaps even. But what I want to do here is, of course, also to point out that we have seen a lot of options to create in a complete different way. Like when we take different light passes, for example, or when we take all the cameras that we have set up for still images and combine them just in a morph to a camera animation. We can render things out. We are not limited in size anymore. We can just create a model and then render out in any resolution that we want to have, which is a huge advantage. Think about the old times when you had maybe a poster to fill instead of just a postcard. Now it's more a push of a button and some time, of course. What we can do also is to change the mood just by creating maybe a different light setup. And with that, I have, for example, in mind here my little gallery that I placed on the beach, one time in the city, one time in the landscape, in the forest, and so on. Each time a complete different light setup without changing the model or having to change anything pretty much, except for the HDR and the rotation maybe of the whole world. So what we have seen here is, of course, that we can even create with some options in Cinema 4D, landscapes with grass or with plants even. We can have thousands of them. There is no limitation really, except limited by maybe your hardware. We have an asset browser that gives us a lot of options in Cinema 4D, and with all of that we can have many cameras in the scene, we can create, we can mix, and of course, as I've shown you also with Photoshop and the render settings, that we can just take many light sources and combine them. There's certainly so much more to say, and I have to stop here sadly, but it was a pleasure and an honor to be here, and I want to say a big thank you.